I swear I saw him move last night, even though he hasn't stepped past that gate in days." Those were the first words that slipped out of my mouth as I sat on the edge of the porch that morning, coffee cooling in my hands, eyes locked on the little brown dog lying by the rusted iron fence down the street. He had been there for nearly a week now, a small figure curled up in the dust just outside a closed gate that belonged to a house I wasn't even sure anyone lived in anymore. At first, I thought he was a stray just passing through, but each day he stayed, watching, waiting, as though someone he loved was going to come through that gate at any moment. My name is Rachel, and I had never considered myself the kind of person who meddles in other people's business. But something about this dog made it impossible to just look away. It started on Monday morning, the first time I noticed him. I was out on my usual jog, the sun just rising over the rooftops, when I spotted him lying there, head on his paws, his whole body tense and still. I slowed as I passed, expecting him to dart off, but he didn't even lift his head. His coat was a matted mess of browns and blacks, his ribs just barely showing under his thin frame. A battered red collar hung loose around his neck. He wasn't new to this neighborhood, at least I'd never seen him before. But he didn't wander. He just stayed put. Every day after that, it was the same scene. He would be there when I left for work, there when I came home, his eyes fixed on that gate as if nothing else in the world mattered. Sometimes he stood when a car passed, tail wagging hopefully, but when no one came, he would curl up again, the picture of quiet patience. Neighbors started talking about him by midweek. Mrs. Whitaker from across the street said she'd seen him scratching at the gate the first night he appeared, whining softly as though begging someone to let him in. Old Mr. Grady said he remembered a young couple living in that house a few months back, but they'd moved suddenly. Nobody knew what had happened to them, or why this dog seemed to think they were still inside. By Thursday, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked down to the gate after dinner, a small bowl of leftover chicken in my hands. He didn't move as I approached, but his eyes flicked toward me, wary and uncertain. I knelt a few feet away and placed the bowl on the ground, stepping back to give him space. He sniffed the air, hesitated, then inched forward to eat, his tail twitching ever so slightly as if he couldn't decide if he was safe or not. That was the first time he looked at me directly, those big brown eyes filled with something I couldn't name. Sadness? Hope? Fear? Maybe all three. I started coming back every evening after that, bringing food and sitting nearby as he ate. He never let me touch him, never left that spot by the gate. But slowly, the tension in his body eased when I came around. He started wagging his tail a little when he saw me, a small gesture that somehow felt monumental. I began asking around, trying to find out who he belonged to. Nobody claimed him. Nobody even knew his name. By Saturday morning, I was desperate for answers. I stood on the other side of that closed gate, peering through the bars at the empty yard beyond. The house looked abandoned, windows shuttered, grass overgrown, but there was a faint sign that someone had lived there not too long ago. A tipped-over lawn chair, a broken toy lying in the dirt. I crouched down and whispered to the dog, "Who are you waiting for, buddy?" He perked his ears, eyes darting to the gate, as if expecting it to swing open right then and there. My heart ached at the sight. That evening, I brought a blanket. It was a cool night, and he had no shelter, no soft place to rest his tired body. I laid the blanket a few feet from him and sat nearby, talking softly about nothing in particular. I told him my name, told him he was safe with me, that I wasn't going to hurt him. He watched me the whole time, silent and still, until finally, just before I left, he crept forward and laid down on the blanket. That was the first time I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could help him. Sunday morning brought a surprise. As I walked down with his breakfast, I saw him standing, tail wagging, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. I followed his gaze to the gate. A breeze shifted, rustling the weeds around it, and for a split second, I could swear I heard a sound, soft footsteps, or maybe just the creak of metal. Then, out of nowhere, a small hand reached through the bars of the gate. The dog leapt forward, tail wagging furiously, whining with excitement as he pressed himself against the fence. My breath caught in my throat as I watched, frozen in shock. There was someone in that house after all, or at least there had been. The hand lingered only for a moment, stroking the dog's head tenderly, before disappearing back into the shadows. The dog sat down, eyes glued to the gate again, hope rekindled in every line of his body. I stood there for a long time, my heart racing, questions swirling in my mind. Who was behind that gate? Why wouldn't they open it? And why had this dog waited here for so long, faithful and patient, believing with all his heart that someone he loved would come back for him? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't leaving him to face it all alone. I don't care what anyone says. There's someone in that house, and I'm not just imagining it. That was the first thing I muttered under my breath as I walked back toward the gate the following morning, a bag of food clutched in one hand and a heart full of questions beating in my chest. The little brown dog was already there, as if he had never left his post all night. His eyes were wide and alert, his body tense but buzzing with anticipation. Whatever had happened yesterday with that mysterious hand had changed him. He wasn't just waiting anymore. He was hoping again. The air was cool and heavy with dew as I approached. The neighborhood was quiet, just the distant hum of a lawnmower somewhere far away and the occasional chirp of a bird greeting the morning. I crouched a few feet from the dog and whispered, "Morning, buddy. Did they come back for you last night?" His ears perked at the sound of my voice, but his gaze stayed locked on the gate. I set the food down gently, stepping back as always, and watched him inch closer to eat. Every few bites, he would glance at the fence, tail giving a hopeful little wag before his nose dipped back into the bowl. I couldn't shake the image of that small hand reaching through yesterday, the tenderness of that brief touch. Someone had been inside. Maybe they still were. But why hadn't they opened the gate? Why not step outside and call for the dog that so clearly adored them? The questions gnawed at me as I sat there on the curb, watching the dog finish his meal. By mid-morning, I decided to try again. I stood slowly, dusted off my jeans, and approached the gate. The yard beyond looked just as deserted as it had for days. Long grass swaying slightly in the breeze, a faded welcome mat by the front steps, the same tipped-over chair. I reached out and gave the gate a soft rattle. "Hello?" My voice came out louder than I intended, startling even me. The dog jumped, then pressed close to the fence, whining softly, as though he understood I was trying to help. There was no answer, no movement. I tried again, a little louder this time. "Hello? Is anyone home?" My words were swallowed by the silence. I glanced down at the dog, who was staring at the house with his entire being, as if willing someone to appear. My heart twisted painfully. "I know you saw them yesterday," I whispered to him, as much to comfort myself as to comfort him. The sun rose higher in the sky, baking the dusty street, but I didn't leave. I stayed there for hours, hoping the hand would appear again, hoping I wasn't going crazy. People passed by now and then, some giving me curious glances, others shaking their heads like I was wasting my time. Mrs. Whitaker even came out of her house once to scold me gently, saying, "Rachel, honey, I think you're getting too caught up in this. Maybe that dog's just lost. Maybe whoever lived there doesn't anymore." But I couldn't accept that. Not after what I saw. Not after that hand. Around noon, the dog shifted restlessly, pacing back and forth by the gate, tail twitching in uncertain arcs. I crouched down and held my hand out to him, not expecting him to come close, but hoping he would feel a little less alone. To my surprise, he took a hesitant step toward me, nose twitching as he sniffed my fingers. It wasn't a full gesture of trust, but it was something. "It's okay, buddy," I said softly. "I'm not leaving you." The afternoon stretched on, slow and heavy. I tried everything I could think of to draw out whoever might be inside. I knocked on the gate again, called out, even circled the fence to look for another way in. But all I found was more overgrown grass and silence. Once I thought I heard a faint shuffle of footsteps inside the house, but when I leaned closer to listen, the noise was gone. My mind swirled with possibilities. Was it a child who had reached out yesterday? Were they scared? Alone? Was there an adult there keeping them inside? By evening, I felt drained, but I wasn't ready to walk away. I sat with the dog as the sun dipped low, painting the street in gold and orange. He lay beside me now, still close to the gate, but not as far as before. Every so often, he would sigh, a sound that seemed too heavy for such a small creature, and rest his head on his paws. I reached out slowly, carefully, and let my fingers hover just above his fur. This time he didn't pull away when I touched him lightly, a fleeting connection that made my heart ache with both sadness and hope. Night was falling when it happened again. I had been dozing lightly, my back against the curb, when the dog suddenly leapt up, tail wagging furiously. My eyes snapped open to see it. A small, pale hand reaching through the bars of the gate once more. The dog bounded forward, whining happily, pressing his nose and face against the hand, licking it as though he'd been waiting for this moment all his life. My breath caught as I sat frozen in the shadows. This time, a voice followed, a soft whisper, almost too quiet to hear. "Good boy. I missed you." The words were tremulous, fragile, like they hadn't been spoken aloud in a long time. I inched closer, desperate to see who it was, but the figure remained hidden behind the darkness of the yard. "Hey," I called softly, not wanting to scare them. "It's okay. I'm Rachel. I've been feeding your dog. Do you need help?" There was a pause. The hand froze for a moment before retreating slightly, but it didn't disappear completely. The voice came again, barely more than a breath. "He's waiting for them to come back." My heart clenched at the sadness in those words. "Who?" I asked gently, pressing closer to the gate. "Who's he waiting for?" But before I could hear an answer, the hand slipped back through the bars, the figure retreating quickly toward the house. The dog whined, scratching at the gate, desperate not to lose the fleeting presence of the one he loved. I pressed my forehead against the cool iron, frustration and sorrow welling up inside me. Someone was in there. Someone knew why this poor dog waited day and night, clinging to hope. and yet they stayed locked away, unseen, unheard, leaving both of us standing on the outside with nothing but questions. That night, as I walked home under the pale glow of the streetlights, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't giving up. Whatever story lay behind that gate, whatever pain kept that person hidden away, I was going to uncover it. For the dog who waited faithfully every hour of every day, for the lonely voice that whispered in the dark, and maybe, just maybe for myself, because I couldn't stand one more day of watching hope fade behind those tired brown eyes. If I have to sit here all night to get answers, then that's exactly what I'll do. Those were the words I said to myself the next morning, standing on the cracked sidewalk with a thermos of coffee and a bag full of sandwiches for both me and the little brown dog who had stolen my heart. 2 days had passed since I first saw the hand and heard that faint, sad voice, and my mind hadn't stopped racing. There was someone in that house, someone who knew the truth about this dog's endless wait. I wasn't about to leave them both in this strange, heartbreaking limbo. The dog was already waiting by the gate when I arrived, tail giving small, hopeful wags when he saw me. He was still thin, but the food I'd been bringing was slowly making a difference. His eyes, though tired, seemed brighter, more alive. I crouched beside him, setting down his breakfast. "Morning, buddy," I whispered softly. "Let's see if today brings us a little more hope, huh?" He wagged his tail harder at the sound of my voice, pressing close to the fence as if he understood every word. I sat down on the curb, sipping my coffee and watching the house. The yard was silent, overgrown, and still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was inside. The memory of that tiny hand reaching through the gate replayed over and over in my head, paired with the sound of that whispered voice. Someone was in there. Someone who loved this dog, or at least knew why he stayed. But they were hiding, trapped in some sadness or fear I couldn't yet understand. As the hours dragged by, I tried to think of ways to draw them out. I called softly toward the house, my words gentle and patient, promising I wasn't there to hurt or judge. I asked simple questions, hoping for a response. "Is he yours? Does he have a name? Are you okay in there?" But each time my only answer was silence, broken only by the rustle of leaves in the wind. Neighbors passed by occasionally, some glancing curiously, others shaking their heads like they thought I was wasting my time. One man even stopped to tell me, "Miss, that place has been empty for months. You're just feeding a stray." But I knew he was wrong. I had seen the hand. I had heard the voice. I wasn't imagining it. By midday, the sun was blazing overhead, and the dog had stretched out on the blanket I'd left for him days before, dozing lightly, but always keeping one ear trained on the gate. I reached through the bars carefully, offering my hand. This time he scooted closer, giving my fingers a tentative lick. My heart swelled with warmth at the simple gesture of trust. "You've been waiting so long," I murmured. "Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere." As evening fell, I decided to stay later than usual. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was inside only felt safe coming to the gate after dark. So I waited. The sky faded from gold to deep indigo, streetlights flickering on one by one. The world grew quiet, save for the occasional chirp of crickets and the distant hum of traffic. The dog sat beside me now, leaning his small frame against the fence, eyes fixed on the house with unwavering focus. Then, just as I had hoped, movement. A faint flicker of light in one of the windows, followed by the softest creak of footsteps on the porch. My heart leapt into my throat as I watched, barely breathing, afraid that any sound would send the presence retreating again. Slowly, hesitantly, a shadow approached the gate, and then, like before, a small hand slipped through the bars. The dog practically vibrated with joy, tail wagging furiously, happy whines spilling from his throat as he showered the hand with kisses. I swallowed my nerves and leaned closer, my voice gentle but firm. "Hi, I'm Rachel. I promise I just want to help. Is this your dog?" The hand froze for a moment, the silence stretching painfully long before a small, hesitant voice whispered, "He's waiting for Mommy and Daddy to come back." The words were so soft I almost didn't catch them, but when I did, my heart broke all over again. I glanced at the dog who had settled against the bars, his entire being focused on the little hand that gave him fleeting comfort. "Where are they?" I asked softly. "Are they coming back soon?" The voice didn't answer right away. Instead, there was a tiny sniffle, the sound of a child trying to be brave. Finally, barely audible, came the words, "They said they'd come back, but it's been a long time." My chest tightened painfully. This wasn't just a stray waiting for an owner. This was a child waiting too, clinging to hope in the same desperate way the dog did. "Sweetheart," I said as gently as I could, "are you all alone in there? Do you need help?" But just like the night before, the hand slipped back through the gate, retreating toward the house without another word. The dog whimpered, pawing at the bars, unwilling to let go of that fleeting connection. I sat there long after the shadow had disappeared, my mind spinning with questions and worry. A child, alone in that house. A dog waiting faithfully outside the gate. Parents who had promised to return but never did. The situation was worse than I'd imagined, and yet I still didn't know the full truth. All I knew was that I couldn't walk away now, not when two lives were hanging in the balance, bound together by hope and heartbreak. That night, as I finally dragged myself home under the quiet blanket of stars, I made another silent promise. I would be back first thing tomorrow. I would stay as long as it took. I would keep calling out to that house until someone answered, until the truth came to light, until that dog didn't have to wait anymore. Because sometimes, when the world fails you, what you need most is someone willing to keep showing up, no matter how long it takes. If someone doesn't help soon, I don't know what will happen to them. Those were the words echoing in my head as I walked briskly down the quiet suburban street the next morning, clutching two paper bags, one with food for the little brown dog, the other with snacks and juice for the child I now knew was hiding in that house. My mind hadn't stopped spinning since last night, torn between worry and determination. I couldn't just call the police or child services yet, not when I didn't know the full story. But I couldn't let a child stay alone in there another day without trying to reach them first. When I arrived, the dog perked up immediately, tail wagging fast when he saw me. I knelt to greet him, offering my hand so he could sniff before placing the bowl of food down. "Morning, buddy," I whispered, stroking his fur lightly as he ate. "We're gonna figure this out. I promise." His big brown eyes lifted to meet mine for a moment, full of quiet trust that gave me a fresh surge of resolve. I sat down on the same spot of curb I'd claimed yesterday, setting the second paper bag beside me. "Hey, sweetheart," I called softly toward the house. "It's me again, Rachel. I brought some food for you too. Would you like to come to the gate?" At first, there was silence except for the soft crunch of kibble as the dog ate. But after a few long minutes, I heard it. a creak of a floorboard, tentative footsteps, a faint rustle near the porch. My heart skipped, and I kept my voice calm and warm. "It's okay. I'm just here to make sure you're okay." Finally, a small figure appeared in the shadows beyond the bars of the gate. A child's thin hand reached through again, trembling slightly as it stroked the dog's head. I scooted closer but stayed a respectful distance from the fence. "Hi, sweetheart," I said gently. "I brought you a sandwich and some juice. You must be hungry." The hand hesitated, then slowly pulled back, retreating toward the yard. I took that as my cue to place the bag closer to the fence, nudging it through the gap. "There you go, it's just turkey and cheese and an apple too. I promise it's safe." After another long pause, the small hand darted out again, dragging the bag toward the porch, before disappearing inside. My heart ached at how fast and frightened the movement was. This wasn't just a lonely child. This was a child scared to be seen, scared to talk. Something terrible must have happened in that house. Something that left both this little one and the loyal dog waiting for a family that might never return. I stayed for hours, trying to coax conversation through the gate, but only managed a few whispered words in response. The child admitted their name was Ellie, and that they were waiting for Mommy and Daddy, who had left a long time ago. She didn't know how long. It seemed days, maybe weeks. She told me they had said they'd be back, and so she waited, and the dog waited too. My throat tightened each time she spoke, her small voice raw with hope and confusion. No child should have to carry that kind of loneliness. As the day stretched on, I noticed the dog pressing closer to the fence whenever Ellie came near, desperate to be let inside but somehow understanding he couldn't cross. He'd whine softly, tail wagging, body trembling with need to protect her. I reached through to scratch his ear, murmuring, "You've been doing such a good job looking out for her, buddy." He gave a soft sigh, leaning into my touch. Late in the afternoon, Mrs. Whitaker came by on her evening walk and gave me a worried look. "Rachel, you've been out here all day again," she said, glancing at the gate. "That house has a bad history. Folks left in a hurry. There were police cars once, but nothing came of it." I asked what she meant, but she only shook her head, muttering about arguments and late-night fights. My stomach twisted with unease. Whatever had happened in that house wasn't just neglect. It sounded darker. When evening fell and the shadows grew long, Ellie came back to the gate once more, whispering through the bars. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" she asked, her voice trembling with hope. I pressed a hand to my chest, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Of course I am, sweetheart. I'll be here every day until we make sure you and your puppy are safe." For the first time, I heard a small, tentative sniff of a laugh from her, the kind of sound only a child can make when they're not sure if joy is allowed. The dog curled up against the fence when Ellie disappeared inside again, as though he refused to leave until she was safe. I stayed until the last light faded, making promises to both of them that I wasn't sure how I'd keep yet. But one thing was certain. Tomorrow, I was going to knock on that door. Whatever fear or sadness was locking that child away from the world, it had gone on long enough. Someone had to step through it. Someone had to bring a little light back into this place, for both Ellie and the faithful friend who had waited through every lonely hour. If no one else is going to knock, then I will. The words left my mouth before I even had time to think, my heart hammering as I stood at the weathered gate the next morning, the little brown dog sitting faithfully by my feet. The sun was just coming up over the rooftops, bathing the quiet street in gold. But the house behind that gate remained cloaked in silence, heavy and waiting. I glanced down at the dog, who looked up at me with those soulful eyes, as if he understood the weight of what I was about to do. We had both spent too many days waiting. Today, something had to change. I pushed the gate open just enough to step through, my steps careful, cautious, but firm. The yard was even more neglected up close. Weeds clawing through cracks in the path, toys abandoned mid-play, a tricycle tipped over on its side. My chest tightened at the thought of Ellie, a child who had been left with memories of happier times and no one to care for her now. I raised my hand and knocked on the door, once, twice, 3 times, each rap louder than the last, praying someone would answer. Nothing but silence. I pressed my ear to the door, listening, holding my breath. Finally, faint footsteps approached from inside. Slow, hesitant. Then a small, shaky voice came through the wood. "Who is it?" My heart cracked at how small and scared she sounded. "It's Rachel, sweetheart," I said softly, keeping my voice warm and steady. "I came back like I promised. Are you okay?" There was a long pause before she whispered, "I don't know if I can open the door." I glanced back at the dog, who had followed me up the path, his tail wagging slowly as he looked between us. "That's okay," I said gently. "You don't have to open it if you don't feel safe. But I brought breakfast, and I thought maybe we could sit together on the porch. You and your pup shouldn't have to stay inside all the time." I set the bag of food down by the door, stepping back to show I meant no harm. After a few tense moments, I heard the soft click of a lock turning. Then the door creaked open just an inch. A small eye peeked through the gap. Ellie looked even tinier than I remembered from the glimpse I'd caught before. Her hair was tangled, cheeks pale, big eyes ringed with exhaustion. She clutched a worn stuffed bunny in one arm, as if it were the only thing tethering her to the world. My heart ached so deeply it felt like it might split in two. "Hi there, sweetheart," I said softly, giving her the gentlest smile I could muster. "I'm Rachel. This is your puppy's friend, remember? We brought you some pancakes today." She hesitated, glancing at the bag, then at me, then finally at the little dog who wagged his tail furiously, whining softly. That seemed to give her courage. The door opened a fraction wider, and she whispered, "He misses Mommy and Daddy." My throat tightened. "I know he does," I said softly. "And you miss them too, don't you?" She nodded, hugging her bunny tighter. "They said they'd come back. I have to wait." I crouched down so I was on her level, keeping a respectful distance. "It's okay to wait," I told her gently. "But you don't have to be alone while you do. I can stay with you, and we can take care of your puppy together, just until they come back. Would that be okay?" Her little face crumpled for a moment, as if she wanted to cry, but was too tired to let the tears come. Finally, she nodded, a tiny, fragile nod that felt like the first crack in the wall around her. Over the next hour, I coaxed her out onto the porch, bit by bit, with the promise of breakfast and the comfort of the dog curled at her side. She sat next to him, feeding him scraps of pancake, her small fingers brushing his fur with a tenderness that made my eyes sting. She barely ate anything herself, but she seemed calmer just having someone there, someone who wasn't leaving. I learned more about her in those quiet moments, how she used to have bedtime stories every night, how she counted stars out the window while she waited for her parents, how the dog was the only friend she could talk to now. I wanted to tell her everything would be okay, that someone was coming for her, but I couldn't lie. What I could promise was that she wouldn't be alone anymore, not if I had anything to do with it. Before I left that day, I crouched in front of her and said softly, "I'm going to come back tomorrow, Ellie. And the next day, and the day after that. We'll take care of each other, okay?" She nodded, clutching her bunny and glancing at the dog for reassurance. For the first time, she whispered, "Thank you." Walking home, I felt a mixture of hope and fear swirling in my chest. Hope because I'd finally reached her. Fear because I knew this wasn't something I could fix alone. Whatever had happened to leave a child and a loyal dog abandoned like this, someone needed to step in soon. But for now, at least, there was a fragile thread of connection between us, a small light in the darkness. And I would not let it go out. "You don't have to hide anymore, Ellie." The words slipped out quietly as I sat on the porch steps the next morning, watching the little girl hover behind the screen door. The dog was already pressed against her legs, tail wagging, his entire being dedicated to keeping her safe. It had been another long night for me, wondering what might have happened to her parents, wondering how long a child could keep waiting before hope turned into something heavier. I had promised her she wouldn't have to face it all alone, and I meant it, even if I still didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I brought a small basket this time, filled with toast, jam, and some juice boxes, hoping the familiarity of kid-friendly food might coax her out. The morning air was warm, cicadas starting to buzz in the distance, and the street was quiet except for a couple of cars heading out early. Slowly, very slowly, Ellie pushed open the door and stepped outside, clutching her stuffed bunny tight. She didn't say much, but she settled on the porch next to her dog, who immediately rested his head on her lap, sighing with contentment. The way he leaned against her, it felt like he was holding both of them together. We shared breakfast, or rather, I watched her feed more to the dog than to herself, but every tiny bite she took felt like a small victory. I kept my voice gentle, talking about nothing important, the way the clouds looked, how the neighbor's cat had been sitting on a fence that morning, even a funny story about spilling coffee on my own shirt. Little by little, she began responding, soft one-word answers at first, then full sentences that came like shy birds fluttering out of hiding. I learned that her dog's name was Benny, that he loved peanut butter more than anything, and that her parents used to take them both to the park every Saturday before they left. She never finished that sentence, just went quiet, eyes downcast, as if afraid to say the truth aloud. Around mid-morning, she tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Can Benny come out of the yard?" My heart clenched because it was the first time she'd asked for anything. I smiled softly and nodded. We unlatched the rusty gate, and Benny bounded out for the first time in days, running in joyous circles around us before coming back to press against Ellie like he was afraid she might disappear if he left her side too long. The sight of them running down the sidewalk together, the tiniest hint of laughter spilling from her lips, was something I knew I'd never forget. We walked slowly down the street, Benny tugging at the leash I'd brought, sniffing everything, free and excited. Ellie stayed close to me, holding the bunny in one hand and the leash in the other, glancing up every so often as if making sure I was still there. I told her we could do this every day if she wanted, that fresh air and sunshine would make both her and Benny feel better. She nodded but said nothing, though the way she squeezed my hand spoke louder than words. When we came back, I suggested we sit in the yard a while. I brought out some chalk from my bag. bright colors that might make the cracked walkway a little happier. Ellie hesitated at first, then slowly took a piece and began drawing flowers, hearts, a big smiling sun. Benny sat nearby, tail thumping against the ground, as if he understood that this quiet play was helping stitch something broken inside her. Every once in a while, Ellie would glance toward the door, as if expecting her parents to walk out and praise her drawings. The emptiness of that space made my chest ache, but I stayed, adding my own silly doodles to the concrete, keeping her company in the waiting. By afternoon, she seemed more comfortable than I'd seen her yet. She even giggled softly when Benny tried to chase a butterfly and fell over himself in the grass. It was such a fragile, precious sound, like the world was finally letting a bit of light back in for her. I wanted to freeze the moment, hold it safe, keep that laugh from ever being taken away again. As the sun dipped lower, I gently reminded her that I'd have to go soon, but I promised to be back in the morning. She looked up at me, eyes wide and uncertain. "You'll really come back?" she asked, her voice trembling. I crouched down so we were eye level, placing a hand over my heart. "Every single day, Ellie. I'm not going anywhere." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded, as if she wanted to believe but didn't quite know how yet. Before I left, she reached out and hugged me, a quick, shy hug that felt like the most important thing in the world. Benny barked once as if to seal the promise between us. Walking home, my mind spun with everything I'd seen and heard. This little girl had been holding herself together with nothing but love for her dog and a fragile hope that her parents would return. I didn't know what tomorrow might bring, but I knew this much. I couldn't let that hope fade. If no one else was going to stand by her side, then I would. And together, maybe we could wait for answers without feeling so alone. "Ellie, would you like to come to my house for lunch today?" The question slipped out softly as we sat under the big oak tree in the yard. Benny sprawled happily in the shade beside us. It had been a full week since she first stepped out to meet me, a week of cautious smiles and whispered words that had grown a little stronger each day. But there was still a weight in her eyes, a quiet sadness that lingered even when Benny made her laugh. I thought maybe a change of scenery, even just for a meal, might ease that burden a little. She hesitated, fingers fidgeting with the edge of her stuffed bunny's ear. "Can Benny come too?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I smiled and nodded. Of course. I wouldn't dream of leaving him behind. That earned me the tiniest of smiles, and for the first time she looked almost excited as we made plans to leave the gate behind for a few hours. We walked slowly, Ellie's small hand gripping mine tightly, Benny trotting at her side as though he understood something important was happening. My house wasn't far, just a few blocks down, and as we made our way, a few neighbors waved, curious about the sight of me leading a child and her loyal dog through the quiet street. I could feel Ellie tense under their gazes, but I gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, keeping my voice light as I told her about the big backyard I had, perfect for Benny to run in. When we reached my home, I let Ellie open the door herself, watching her eyes widen as she stepped into the sunlit living room. It wasn't much, just a cozy space with worn furniture and shelves lined with books, but it felt alive, warm, and maybe that's what struck her the most. She stood silently for a moment, taking everything in before whispering, "It smells like cookies." I laughed softly, explaining that I'd baked earlier, just in case she wanted something sweet after lunch. Benny immediately began exploring, sniffing every corner, his tail wagging wildly, as though giving the place his approval. We made sandwiches together in the kitchen, Ellie perched on a chair beside me, carefully placing slices of cheese and ham on bread while I poured milk into glasses. She stayed quiet, but every now and then I caught her stealing glances at me, as if trying to figure out whether she could trust this moment of kindness. We ate at the table, Benny stretched out by her feet, and for a little while, it almost felt like a normal afternoon, like she belonged somewhere safe. After lunch, I took her outside to the backyard. The sun was bright, a gentle breeze moving through the trees, and Benny wasted no time darting across the grass, chasing after an old tennis ball I'd found. Ellie's laughter bubbled out freely, the sound startling both of us at first, then growing louder as she joined in Benny's game, running barefoot through the grass, hair flying behind her. I stayed near, just watching, my heart full as I saw pieces of her childhood slowly come back to life in the sunlight. When she finally collapsed on the grass, giggling and out of breath, she turned to me and whispered, "I wish my house felt like this." The words cut deep, but I kept my expression soft, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You deserve a place that feels safe, Ellie. And until we figure everything out, you're always welcome here." She studied me for a long moment before nodding, as though making a silent promise to believe me this time. Later, as the day turned to evening, we walked back toward her house, Benny happily padding along beside us. Ellie held my hand the whole way, quieter now but not withdrawn, just thoughtful. When we reached the gate, she paused, looking up at me. "Will you come back tomorrow?" The question didn't hold fear anymore, just hope. I knelt beside her, smiling softly. "Every day, Ellie. I told you, I'm not going anywhere." She hugged me again, tighter this time, Benny wagging his tail as if sealing the promise for both of us. As I walked home alone, I realized how much had changed in just a few days. Ellie wasn't the silent, trembling little girl I'd first met, and Benny no longer looked quite so thin and weary. They were both still waiting, still holding on to a hope that someone they loved might come back through that gate. But now, they weren't waiting alone anymore, and I knew I'd do whatever it took to keep that promise for as long as they needed me. The morning sun was barely above the rooftops when I set out with a backpack full of fresh muffins, a small thermos of hot cocoa, and a couple of chew toys for Benny. I had been thinking about Ellie and Benny all night, wondering what more I could do for them, how I could keep building this fragile bridge of trust between us. They had both lived in such uncertainty for too long, waiting by that closed gate day after day, holding on to memories that might never walk back through. If there was one thing I could give them, it was moments of comfort, something to remind them that kindness still existed outside the walls of that silent house. When I turned the corner, I saw them already waiting. Benny was stretched out near the gate, head resting on his paws, while Ellie sat cross-legged beside him, the stuffed bunny in her lap. She looked up the moment she heard my footsteps, her face lighting up with a smile that seemed a little braver than the day before. I waved, feeling warmth spread through me at the sight. "Morning, sunshine," I said softly as I approached, setting my backpack down in the patch of grass nearby. Benny was on his feet in seconds, tail wagging, and Ellie giggled as he sniffed eagerly at the pack, already guessing there were treats inside. I handed her a muffin first, then poured cocoa into a cup, watching her take careful sips as though savoring every drop. Benny devoured his snack with pure joy, his tail sweeping the ground, and for a little while the quiet street felt like the happiest place on earth. We spent the morning like that, sharing food, talking about small things, her favorite colors, how she used to help in a garden once, the funny way Benny would tilt his head when he heard certain sounds. She was still hesitant with bigger topics, but there was more laughter today, more curiosity shining in her eyes. I didn't press for details about the house or who she might be waiting for. Instead, I just let her lead the conversation, letting trust grow at its own pace. After a while, I pulled one of the new toys from my bag, a bright blue rope tug, and handed it to Ellie. "Think Benny might like this?" I asked. Her face lit up as she took it, holding it out to him. He grabbed it instantly, tail wagging, and the two of them played in the grass, laughter and happy barks filling the air. I sat back, just watching, my heart swelling at the sight of this tiny oasis of joy blooming right there on the edge of sadness. When they were both worn out, Ellie curled up against Benny, resting her head on his soft fur. She was quiet for a long moment, then said in a small voice, "Sometimes I dream that the gate opens and everything goes back to how it was. But when I wake up, it's still closed." My chest tightened at her words, but I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face gently. "Dreams are special because they show us what our hearts really want," I told her softly. "And sometimes, even if things can't go back to how they were, they can still get better. Sometimes we find new ways to be happy again." She looked at me, searching my face as though trying to decide whether to believe me. Finally, she nodded, just a little, and nestled closer to Benny, finding comfort in his steady warmth. The hours slipped by, the sun climbing higher as we shared stories and snacks, until finally Ellie turned to me with an unexpected question. "Can we go to the park today?" It was the first time she had asked to leave the safety of the gate. The first time she wanted to see more of the world outside that narrow strip of sidewalk. My heart leapt at the thought of giving her that small adventure. "Absolutely," I said with a smile, standing and holding out my hand. She took it after a heartbeat of hesitation, Benny trotting eagerly beside us, as if he had been waiting for this moment forever. We walked slowly, her grip on my hand firm but less afraid now, her eyes wide as she looked around, taking in everything we passed, the bright flowers in Mrs. Whitaker's yard, the sound of a lawnmower buzzing in the distance, the blue sky stretching endlessly overhead. At the park, Benny ran free on the grass, chasing squirrels and rolling in the clover, while Ellie climbed onto the swings. I pushed her gently, her laughter ringing out louder than I'd ever heard before, free and unguarded. We stayed for hours, playing, talking, letting happiness seep into the cracks that sadness had left behind. When we finally walked back, the sun was beginning to dip low, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Ellie looked tired but content, holding my hand without fear now, Benny walking proudly at her other side. As we reached the gate, she stopped and looked up at me, eyes shining with something new. "Today was the best day," she whispered, almost as if she didn't want to break the spell of it. I knelt down, smiling softly. "We can have more days like this, Ellie, as many as you want." She threw her arms around my neck, hugging me tight, Benny pressing close as if to join in. In that moment, I realized how much they both needed this, needed someone to stand with them, to bring light back into their days of waiting. And I silently promised again, with everything in me, that I would keep showing up, every morning, every afternoon, for as long as it took to help them find a new kind of happiness. The next morning came with a soft drizzle that left the streets glistening, and I worried for a moment that Ellie and Benny might not be outside the gate. But as I turned the familiar corner, there they were, sitting under the overhang of the fence, Benny's head resting on Ellie's lap while she hummed a little tune. It was a quiet, gentle scene, and for a second, I just stood there watching, my heart full at how much more at ease they both seemed compared to when we first met. I approached slowly, calling out a cheerful good morning as I set down my bag of breakfast and a couple of towels I'd brought in case they were damp from the rain. Ellie looked up and smiled, a little shy still, but with more warmth than before. Benny bounded over to me, tail wagging furiously despite the rain. I crouched to scratch behind his ears, feeling his damp fur and thinking about how far he'd come from the fearful, tense dog I'd first seen lying by this gate. We ate together under the overhang, sharing muffins and cocoa, the drizzle pattering softly around us. Ellie was quieter than usual, though, her gaze often wandering to the house beyond the gate. I didn't push, but after a while I asked softly if something was on her mind. She hesitated before nodding. "I thought I heard a voice last night," she said, glancing at the house. It sounded like someone was calling for Benny, but then it went away. The words sent a pang through me. Whether it had been real or just a dream, it reminded me how much uncertainty still wrapped around this place and this little girl's life. I wanted so badly to know what story lay behind that gate, who had lived there, why Ellie and Benny were left outside waiting. But I knew rushing her wouldn't help. So instead, I reached over and squeezed her hand gently. Voices can come and go, but one thing's for sure. You're not alone out here anymore. Her eyes met mine, and something softened in her expression. She nodded slowly and gave my hand a small squeeze back. Benny nudged us both with his nose, as if agreeing, and soon we were laughing again as we dried him off with the towels, turning the mood lighter. Later that morning, we decided to take another walk, despite the drizzle. Ellie seemed more eager to explore now, asking questions about every little thing we passed, the names of flowers, the sound of a distant train, the way the puddles mirrored the gray sky. It felt like she was rediscovering the world one small step at a time, and Benny stayed close by, wagging his tail every time she laughed. We ended up at the park again, where the rain had left everything smelling fresh and new. We played under the big oak tree, tossing a ball for Benny and making little boats out of fallen leaves to float in the puddles. Ellie's giggles rang out over the quiet park, and I felt a kind of peace settle over us. Like the world outside this moment didn't matter as long as we were together. On the way back, we stopped at a small diner I knew, where the owner was kind enough to let us sit on the covered porch with Benny. Ellie's eyes grew wide as she tasted a warm chocolate chip cookie fresh from the oven, and for a moment, she looked like any other little girl on a rainy day, safe and happy. I tucked that sight away in my heart, determined to give her more moments like this. When we finally reached the gate again, the drizzle had stopped, and the sun was starting to peek through the clouds. Ellie hesitated before sitting down, glancing at the house. Do you think the people who lived here will come back someday?" she asked softly. I knelt beside her, unsure of the answer, but knowing I had to be honest while still giving her hope. "I don't know," I admitted gently. "But even if they don't, there are people who care about you and Benny now. You've got me, and maybe soon, more friends too. The world's bigger than this gate, Ellie. There are so many people out there who would be lucky to know you both." She was quiet for a long moment, thinking about my words, then slowly leaned against me, resting her head on my shoulder. Benny curled up at our feet, letting out a content sigh. We stayed like that for a long time, just listening to the soft rustle of leaves and the faint chirp of birds returning after the rain. Before I left that day, I promised Ellie we'd do something special tomorrow, a surprise adventure that would show her a little more of the kindness the world could hold. She smiled, a real, bright smile this time, and hugged me tightly before I walked away. As I glanced back one last time, I saw her leaning against the gate, holding Benny close, both of them watching me go with something new in their eyes, something that looked a lot like trust. The next morning, I woke before dawn, my mind buzzing with plans for the day ahead. I wanted to keep my promise to Ellie, to show her something wonderful beyond that lonely gate, something that might help her see there was more to life than waiting. I packed a small picnic, added a few surprises I thought might make her smile, and set out early, the morning air cool and crisp as the sun began to rise over the rooftops. When I reached the familiar corner, Ellie and Benny were already there, sitting side by side. Ellie was tracing patterns in the dirt with a stick, while Benny dozed with his head on her knee. As soon as they saw me, Benny leapt up, tail wagging furiously, and Ellie's face lit up in a way that made my heart swell. "Morning, Rachel," she said softly, the hint of excitement in her voice making me smile. "Morning, sweetheart," I said warmly. "Are you ready for our adventure today?" Her eyes widened and she nodded eagerly, glancing down at Benny as if asking if he was ready too. Benny barked once as though answering for them both. We laughed, and just like that, the day began on a high note. We set off walking, heading toward the nearby park, but taking a different route this time, one that wound through quiet streets lined with big trees and little gardens bursting with color. Ellie pointed out flowers she liked, butterflies that fluttered past, and Benny trotted happily at our side, stopping now and then to sniff the grass or watch a squirrel dart up a tree. It felt like the first steps of something new, something brighter. Eventually, we reached a wide open meadow on the edge of town, a hidden spot most people didn't know about. The grass was long and soft, wildflowers swaying in the gentle breeze, and a little creek sparkled as it wound its way through the field. Ellie gasped when she saw it, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's so big," she whispered, as though afraid to disturb the magic of it. I spread out a blanket under a tall oak tree, unpacking the picnic I'd brought: sandwiches, fruit, cookies, and a little thermos of hot cocoa. Ellie's eyes shone as we set everything out, and Benny wagged his tail in anticipation of his own treats. We sat together, eating and laughing, the worries of the world feeling far away. Ellie leaned back on the blanket at one point, staring up at the sky. "It feels like we're not waiting anymore," she murmured, almost to herself, and the words caught me by surprise, filling me with a quiet joy. After lunch, we played by the creek, tossing sticks for Benny and skipping stones across the water. Ellie's laughter rang out, pure and free, the sound of a child forgetting for a while the sadness that had weighed her down. Watching her run with Benny, hair flying, cheeks flushed, I felt a deep sense of purpose settle in me. I wanted to protect this light, to make sure she never had to feel alone again. As the sun began to dip lower, we lay in the grass, watching clouds drift lazily across the sky. Ellie turned to me suddenly, a serious look on her face. "Rachel," she said softly, Do you think Benny and I could really have a home again? Like with someone who stays?" Her voice was fragile, as if she feared the answer. I reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, sweetheart," I said firmly. "I believe that with all my heart. Sometimes it takes time, and sometimes we have to meet a few people along the way. But there's always someone out there who's meant to be your family." She stared at me for a long moment before nodding slowly, a spark of hope in her eyes. We stayed a little longer until the first stars began to twinkle in the evening sky. Then we packed up and walked back toward the gate, the air cool and filled with the soft sounds of crickets. Ellie held my hand the whole way, Benny padding beside us, and I could feel something shifting, something fragile but strong beginning to grow between us. When we reached the gate, Ellie hesitated as always, glancing toward the silent house. But this time, instead of sitting right away, she turned to me. "Thank you," she whispered. "Today was the best day I've had in a long time." I knelt and hugged her tightly, promising there would be more days like this, many more. Benny pressed close to both of us, his tail wagging gently as if he understood every word. As I walked away that night, I glanced back to see Ellie and Benny settling down together. But they looked different now, less like they were waiting for something that might never come, and more like they were dreaming of all the possibilities ahead. And I promised myself I'd do everything I could to make sure those dreams came true. The next morning dawned with a golden light spilling across the street, a welcome change after the gray drizzle of yesterday. I walked quickly, excitement buzzing through me as I thought about the small adventure I had planned for Ellie and Benny. I wanted them to see a little more of the world, something beyond that gate and the hard concrete they had grown used to. As I rounded the familiar corner, there they were, waiting as if they had known I'd come early today. Benny wagged his tail wildly the second he spotted me, and Ellie stood, brushing off her worn jeans with a hopeful smile that warmed my heart. We had breakfast together on the curb, sharing bagels and fruit juice. Ellie seemed more talkative this morning, asking about where we were going and if there would be other dogs there. I kept the surprise to myself, only telling her that it would be somewhere safe where Benny could run and play as much as he wanted. She held on to every word, as though even the promise of a short trip away from this gate was a gift she hadn't dared dream about. After breakfast, we set out. Benny trotted happily beside us on the makeshift leash I'd brought, tugging gently every so often, like he knew we were heading somewhere good. Ellie walked close to me, her small hand gripping mine, her eyes flicking curiously at every car, every bird that darted past, as if she was learning the world all over again. It struck me how small her world had been these past few weeks, bounded by that closed gate and a thin patch of sidewalk. Today, I wanted to show her something more. We arrived at the dog park on the edge of town, a wide open space of green grass and old trees swaying gently in the breeze. The moment we stepped inside, Benny froze for a heartbeat, as if unsure whether he was allowed to enjoy it. But then Ellie whispered softly to him, giving a little nod, and he was off, racing across the grass like a creature reborn, barking happily at the other dogs who bounded up to greet him. Ellie laughed, the sound bright and unguarded, and I could almost see the weight she carried lift a little more with every passing second. We spent hours there, throwing balls for Benny, watching him play chase with a golden retriever who seemed just as thrilled to have a new friend. Ellie's cheeks flushed pink from running and laughing, and when she stumbled and fell into the grass, she only giggled harder, rolling around as Benny came bounding over to nuzzle her face. I watched them, feeling something deep inside me shift, like I was witnessing the start of healing, fragile but real. At lunchtime, We sat under a big oak tree, eating sandwiches while Benny sprawled next to us, panting happily. Ellie asked if there would always be places like this where they could go, somewhere safe, somewhere kind. I told her yes, that the world held more kindness than hurt, even if sometimes it didn't seem that way. Her eyes searched mine, looking for truth, and I hoped she found it there. In the afternoon, I surprised Ellie with a stop at an ice cream stand near the park. She chose strawberry, Benny got a little cup of vanilla made just for dogs, and we sat on a bench watching the world go by. For the first time since meeting her, Ellie looked completely at ease, swinging her legs and smiling at passers-by without that guarded look she usually wore. It felt like sunlight breaking through clouds, and I silently promised myself I'd do everything I could to keep that light in her life. We walked home slowly, Benny tired but happy, sticking close to Ellie's side. As we reached the gate, the sight of it didn't seem to weigh her down quite as much as before. She turned to me, holding Benny's leash, and said softly, "Today felt like magic." I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and told her that there would be more days like this, that magic could be found all around if you knew where to look. She hugged me tightly, whispering a thank you that nearly broke my heart with its quiet sincerity. Before leaving, I made plans with her for tomorrow. Another small adventure. Another step toward a life where waiting outside a closed gate wasn't the only thing she knew. As I walked away, I looked back to see Ellie sitting with Benny, their heads close together, sharing a moment of peace that felt hard-won and precious. And even from a distance, I could see something new blooming in that little patch of sidewalk, a seed of hope that was finally beginning to grow. The sun climbed higher in the sky as I made my way back to the gate the next morning, the warmth already promising a beautiful day ahead. I carried a backpack filled with little surprises, determined to make this another step forward for Ellie and Benny. As soon as I turned the corner, Benny's bark rang out, excited and happy, and Ellie stood up from where she had been sitting, waving to me with a grin that reached her eyes this time. It felt like a small victory, seeing her greet me without the shadow of hesitation that had once been there. We shared a quick breakfast of pancakes I had brought along, Benny happily nibbling on the bits Ellie snuck him under the napkin. The plan today was different. I wanted to take them to the local farmers market, a bustling place filled with friendly faces, colorful stalls, and the kind of life that Ellie deserved to see and feel. She listened intently as I described it, her hand gripping mine as we set off together, Benny trotting alongside us with his tail wagging like a banner of joy. The market was already alive when we arrived, with the smells of fresh bread, flowers, and fruit filling the air. Ellie's eyes widened as she took in the scene, her head swiveling this way and that, her lips parted in awe. Benny barked softly, as if sharing her excitement. We walked slowly, letting her take it all in, stopping at stalls to sample honey, smell wildflowers, and taste strawberries so sweet they seemed like candy. The vendors greeted her warmly, one woman even giving Benny a free treat just because she thought he looked like the happiest dog there. We sat near the fountain in the center of the market, watching children chase each other while their parents chatted nearby. Ellie dipped her fingers in the cool water, a small smile playing on her lips as Benny sprawled beside her, content after finishing his treat. I asked her what she liked most about today so far, and she said softly, "It feels like we belong here." The words settled heavy in my chest, a reminder of how much she had been yearning for a place where she and Benny could feel at home, even just for a moment. After exploring the market some more, I bought Ellie a small bracelet with a silver charm shaped like a paw print. When I clasped it around her wrist, she stared at it in wonder, saying she'd never had something so pretty before. I told her it was a reminder that she and Benny were meant to be loved and cherished, no matter what had happened before. She hugged me tightly, holding on longer than I expected, and Benny pressed against our legs as if he wanted in on the embrace. Later, we found a quiet park near the market, where we sat under a large tree, watching the clouds drift lazily across the sky. Ellie lay on the grass, pointing out shapes she saw: a bunny, a ship, a heart, and Benny rolled around happily nearby, chasing a butterfly that fluttered just out of reach. It was a simple moment, but it felt profound. Like every laugh and every breath of fresh air was stitching something back together inside her heart. On the walk back, we stopped for ice cream again, this time Ellie choosing mint, while Benny enjoyed another little cup of dog-friendly vanilla. She giggled as a drop of melted ice cream landed on her nose and Benny licked it off before I could hand her a napkin. The sound of her laughter echoed in the warm air, and I found myself hoping the world would never take that joy from her again. When we reached the gate, Ellie didn't sit down right away. Instead, she stood there, looking at the house beyond the fence, then at me, as though weighing something big in her mind. Finally, she asked if I thought they would ever find a real home again. Not just the memory of one, but a new one where they could stay forever. I knelt beside her and told her that I believed they would, that the world was too wide and too full of good people for it not to happen. She nodded slowly, holding on to that thought like a lifeline. Before I left, Ellie tugged on my sleeve and whispered that today had felt like a dream she didn't want to wake from. I promised her there would be more days like this, more adventures waiting just around the corner, and that as long as I was there, she and Benny wouldn't have to wait alone ever again. She hugged me once more, Benny pressing in close, and I walked away with a heart full of hope for the days yet to come, knowing this was only the beginning of the story we were writing together. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, a quiet excitement filling my chest as I packed a bag with one last surprise for Ellie and Benny. This was going to be a big day, one that would change everything for them. As I walked down the familiar path toward the gate, my heart pounded with anticipation, thinking about how far we had come from those first hesitant days. When I turned the corner, I saw Ellie already standing there, holding Benny close, her eyes lighting up when she spotted me. We had breakfast together one last time at the gate, sharing muffins and juice while Benny curled at our feet. I told Ellie I had something special planned, a place I wanted to take them that was unlike anywhere we'd been before. She looked at me curiously, but didn't ask questions, trusting me completely now. That trust made my chest ache with a kind of happiness I hadn't felt in years. We set off toward a part of town Ellie hadn't seen yet. I held her hand as we walked, Benny happily trotting along, his ears perked up, sensing the change in the day's mood. When we reached the quiet street lined with trees, Ellie looked around, confused but hopeful. We stopped in front of a charming white house with blue shutters, a cozy yard, and a big oak tree standing proudly by the porch. A kind woman with kind eyes stepped out to greet us, kneeling to let Benny sniff her hand before offering Ellie a warm smile. I knelt beside Ellie, explaining that this woman, Mrs. Harper, had heard their story and wanted to meet them. She had been looking for someone to love and take care of, and after hearing about Ellie and Benny, she thought maybe they could become a family. Ellie's eyes went wide, and she glanced at the house, then back at me, uncertainty flickering across her face. I squeezed her hand gently, telling her that this could be the home she had dreamed of, the one where she and Benny would never have to wait outside a gate again. Mrs. Harper invited us in, and we spent the afternoon together. She showed Ellie a sunny little bedroom with soft blankets and a window that looked out over the yard. Benny explored every corner of the house, his tail wagging furiously, as though he already knew this was the place he belonged. Ellie was shy at first, but soon she was laughing as Mrs. Harper showed her how to bake cookies, letting her stir the dough and lick a bit of batter from the spoon. The warmth of the house, the kindness in Mrs. Harper's eyes, it all wrapped around us like a promise. We went outside to the backyard, where Benny chased a ball, while Ellie and I sat on the porch steps. She leaned into me and whispered that it felt like a dream again. Only this time she hoped she wouldn't wake up. I told her this wasn't a dream. This was real, and it was hers to keep if she wanted it. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and asked if it was okay to love someone new, to start fresh. I told her love never runs out. It only grows. And she nodded, wiping her cheeks before running off to join Benny. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with gold and pink, Mrs. Harper brought out lemonade for all of us. She knelt by Ellie, speaking softly, telling her she'd be honored to have her and Benny stay, that they could make this house their forever home. Ellie threw her arms around her, hugging tight, and Benny barked happily, circling them as if sealing the deal himself. In that moment, I knew they had found where they were meant to be. Later, when it was time for me to leave, Ellie clung to me, her face pressed against my side. I promised her I'd visit, that I'd always be there for her, but that now she had someone who would tuck her in every night and make sure Benny had a warm spot by the fire. She nodded, a little tearful but smiling, her eyes shining with a hope so strong it lit up the whole porch. I walked away slowly, turning back to see Ellie standing at the gate. Not the old one where we first met, but this new one, leading to a home filled with love and warmth. Benny stood beside her, tail wagging, as Mrs. Harper rested a hand on her shoulder. For the first time since I had found them waiting alone, I knew they would never have to feel that kind of loneliness again. Their story had led them here, to open arms, a soft bed, and a hand reaching through a gate not to leave them behind, but to welcome them home forever.